Welcome to UBP TV. We have seen many uncertainties coming back on markets. The US activity has weakened, data have disappointed in Japan and China, there are regular concerns about deflationary risks in the Eurozone, and finally, the situation in emerging countries has become more complex. Do we enter a new trend? Will global growth weaken? Let's examine the situation and the prospects in the different regions. First, the US. The US economy is expected to soften in the first quarter to 2.5%. This slowdown is mainly due to the exceptional difficult weather conditions and to some inventory adjustment. US GDP growth is expected to reaccelerate further to 3% and 3.5% in the following quarters. Fundamentals remain positive, and particularly for consumers, even if data are volatile. We do think the US growth should reach 3.4% this year, which is at the top of the consensus. Second, the situation in Japan. GDP growth was slightly lower than expected in the fourth quarter due to a strong rise in imports. Domestic demand was in a better shape thanks to more sustained consumption and a rebound in capex and in housing. In the second quarter of this year, we could see some headwinds due to the negative effects coming from the rise in VAT. There is a risk to derail the positive trend seen in domestic demand. This is the reason why we have slightly revised down our forecast in Japan from 1.6 to 1.4% this year. Third, China and the situation in emerging countries. China has launched several reforms which are positive for the long-term trajectory of the economy. But the first effects are negative, which explains the cyclical slowdown in activity seen in the first quarter. Headwinds are coming from a tight monetary policy, moderate demand, and anti-corruption and anti-pollution campaigns. The China's GDP is expected to remain moderate in the first semester of this year, before regaining more positive momentum in the second part of this year. We do not fear any hard landing in China, and we think the authorities will manage successfully this transition period. As China slows down, there is also less demand for other emerging countries. These countries have not yet made sufficient reforms to be able to stop capital outflows and restore confidence. We saw some responses from central banks and governments, but not so much in terms of structural reforms to restore productivity and competitiveness. So globally, we are still facing downside risk and growth in emerging. Nevertheless, we do not think the situation in these countries could derail the road growth, but we will watch closely the next developments, and particularly in Ukraine and Russia. Fourth point, is there any risk of deflation in the Eurozone? Inflation is expected to reach new lows at 0.5% year-on-year in the first quarter. It should rebound to 1% year-on-year at the year-end. Activity is not entering a deflation. We do expect the recovery to continue, driven by Germany and a more positive trend in peripherals. Capex and exports should drive the acceleration this year. We expect 1.3% growth this year in the Eurozone, a bit ahead of the consensus, which is at 1%. The ECB has the means to avoid a deflationary scenario. Let's imagine a European quantitative easing. But before that, the ECB could inject more liquidity in the system and give more support. In conclusion, despite the uncertainties, the world growth continues to accelerate, driven by the US, Germany, and some stabilization expected in China. Monetary policy also remained largely accommodative in the G7 countries. So the global macro picture remains positive and should underpin positive trend in financial markets. Thank you, and see you soon on UBP TV.